Okay, I want to talk about urban Scotland. So specifically Glasgow and Edinburgh, which are kind of in the middle, southern middle of Scotland, just north of the border regions, just north of England, in what is typically referred to as the central belt of Scotland. They're about an hour apart, 50 minutes apart by train or driving. And Edinburgh, of course, is the main place that people, I think, visit when they go to Scotland. If you can only visit one place in Scotland, it makes a lot of sense to go to Edinburgh. There are 6 cities in Scotland, but in terms of population, most people live in Glasgow or Edinburgh, about 500,000 or 600,000 in each, about 1 million in the Glasgow greater area, and all of the rest of the other 4 combined don't really, maybe 500,000 between the 4 of them. When most people think of Edinburgh, the first thing that comes to mind is its Hilltop Castle. So that's where the city was born. It started out on the top of the hill. It's naturally fortified on 3 sides by sheer rock, and then it's just a gentle slope about 1 mile down the hill. So that's the original city that goes back over 1,000 years. So it makes sense in a visit to start at the castle, or definitely to include that on your visit if you don't do it right off the bat. So approaching the castle, you're met by Scotland's 2 most famous heroes, Robert the Bruce and William Wallace, on either side of the gates, and Scotland's motto, which I won't say in Latin, but essentially means "no one attacks me with impunity." So you get a sense of kind of this proud and tough Scottish history. If you're going to the castle, usually you'd want to either arrive as early as you can, first thing in the morning, or after 2 or 3 p.m., just later in the day. So it does get very, very, very busy, as I'm sure you can imagine, and also expect to be taking quite a hike. It is at the top of a slope, and it itself contains, as you work your way up to the crown square in the castle, you're still going uphill. So it is kind of a hike, but well worth it. One thing that I think people don't always realize is that it's not just a castle. Of course, you know that there are many rooms in a castle, but it's actually multiple museums and sites inside of one site. So for example, you have the royal apartments. You have the crown jewels of Scotland are on display there. You have also the National War Memorial, and so there's a lot to do and see inside. So I'd say spend a couple of hours really taking your time and checking it out, and do a bit of reading about it before you go so that you know where you want to head as soon as you get inside. Just outside of the castle on the esplanade, before you walk up to the entrance, you will probably see some bleachers being put up or in the process of being taken down. That's just the case for most of the year. And what they're preparing for, or what they're tidying up from, is the Edinburgh Military Tattoo, which takes place in August as well. So if you're there in August, I would absolutely recommend that you go. It is a phenomenal spectacle, masked bands and drumming and Highland dancers and the works. So it's absolutely worth it. You'd want to buy your tickets ahead of time online. As I mentioned, Edinburgh Castle is at the top of a long sloping street. It stretches out for 1 mile from the castle all the way down to the bottom, where you'll find Holyrood Palace, which is the Queen's official residence in Scotland. That street is known as the Royal Mile. So it's one of the most fascinating historical walks anywhere in Europe. There is a lot of kitschy touristic stuff happening there, fun shops full of Scottish gear and blasting horrible bagpipe music out of them. But there's a lot of worthwhile stuff to do as well, and lots of shops that are very nice and are not just full of, tartan junk. For a more authentic experience with whiskey on the Royal Mile, you might pop into Cat and Heads. The folks who work there are absolutely evangelical about whiskey. It's straight from the cask, and they'll teach you all about it. When Rick travels in Scotland, he goes there and he gets himself a small bottle and he keeps it in his hotel room, and every night before he goes to bed, he just has a little nip. And it's a part of his Scottish experience every time, so you might consider doing the same. There are tons of museums in Edinburgh. You can't see them all with one visit, but the Museum of Edinburgh, telling the story of the town, the Museum of Childhood with fun toys and games from through the ages, the Museum of John Knox house, the famous reformer, Scottish reformer. And whether or not you are particularly interested in John Knox or the Scottish Reformation, one site that you definitely have to visit when you're in Edinburgh is St. Giles Cathedral. You can spot it. It's about 1/3 of the way down the Royal Mile. It is easily visible as a part of the skyline with its thorny spire. So you definitely have to pop inside. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's the most important church in Scotland. It's actually not a cathedral either. It's the High Church, but for a time it was a cathedral, so the name has just stuck. But it's gorgeous inside, and it's full of Scottish regalia and pageantry, and there's also a nice cafe in the basement. John Knox's grave is actually outside in the parking lot. So true to his word of preaching austerity, he's buried just outside at number 23. At the bottom of the mile, you find Holyrood Palace, as I mentioned, but also the Scottish Parliament. So Scotland and England officially joined together in a political union in 1707. Before that, Scotland had been an independent country with its own parliament, its own kings and everything like that, a complicated history. But at any rate, in 1707, it voted its own parliament out of existence, and it did not have a parliament for almost 300 years. It now does have its own devolved parliament, so it's really interesting to go and check out the building, which is a glorious modern creation, and you can also go inside for a free tour and learn about the Scottish government. So they have control over certain issues, for example, education, the Scottish branch of the National Health Service, whereas other issues are reserved for the Whitehall government down in London, so for example, foreign policy and national defense, that type of thing. So that's one thing to do. You could also tour the Palace of Holyrood. It contains the Queen's galleries, so some of the Queen's private collections of art, which are really nice. You can stroll the gardens. If you're interested in Scottish history, that's a good thing to do. Many of the museums in Scotland are free. This one is not free, but if you're interested in royal history or anything like that, it's a must-do. Another site that you might want to check out, in fact, you should check out if you're going to be in Scotland, and it's just in the old part of town, is the National Museum of Scotland. It contains artifacts from throughout the ages in Scotland. Half of it is built to look like an old castle, and half is a beautiful Victorian arcade. So this portion is sort of more sciences and things. It's kind of Smithsonian, eclectic, and fun for families. The other half that I just showed a slide of that looks like a castle from the outside is complete Scottish history from the geological formations of the country, through the Dark Ages, early kingdoms, through the Middle Ages, and so on and so forth, up through time. So you get to the Industrial Revolution. So it's about 6 stories, and it is really, really fascinating. This is a free museum, so if you're interested in Scottish history at all, you definitely have to check it out. And you can go in and check it out for an hour or two and go do something else and then come back the next day and see what you didn't get to check out the first time. That's absolutely fine. It's capped with a beautiful terrace on the rooftop. On a clear day, you get really nice views of the city and the water, so definitely check that out. So until now, we have been in the Old Town. So if you are looking at a map of Scotland, you see Edinburgh Castle down sort of in the bottom left corner. And from there, just stretching across the screen, is the Royal Mile all the way down to, as we just mentioned, the Palace of Holyrood. All of these kind of zigzaggy streets in that area, that's the Old Town, so that's the original Edinburgh. It came to a point where the city was so overcrowded, so smelly, and so confined, and this was in the 1700s, so during the age of the Enlightenment. And it was decided that Edinburgh needed to grow. It needed a new city, a new portion of the city that was fit for the new elite. And these are, artists and lawyers and great thinkers like David Hume and Adam Smith. So they drained a lake that had existed just to the north along the Royal Mile, just down the hill, but just to the north. They drained it out, and it's now beautiful gardens, Princess Street Gardens, and then to the north of that, they built a new town. So Edinburgh is actually 2 cities in one, and each of them, in its own right, each of them is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so recognized for its international important contribution to our culture. So they're really, really distinct and both worth checking out. So if you just head straight down the hill north from the Royal Mile, you end up in Edinburgh's New Town. So now I'm going to talk about some of the sites to check out while you're in the New Town. First of all, you might just want to enjoy some time in Princess Street Gardens. On a beautiful day, it's full of people picnicking and just hanging out. I mentioned that this was constructed during the Age of Enlightenment, Edinburgh's nickname up until this point had been Old Reeky, the old smelly city, you know. And then I think it was the men of the Enlightenment who gave themselves this new nickname, or gave their city this new nickname, but it became known as the Athens of the North. So, and it really shows big, beautiful palatial townhouses. New homes were built with the facades to look like a palace, and everything in pristine order, neoclassical design, statues at all the axes on the streets, and also lined up to have gorgeous views of the old town. So it's really thoughtfully designed and absolutely a delight to explore. The National Gallery in Scotland is full of lesser known works from some of the great masters of Renaissance art, Baroque art, Impressionist art, and lots of British painting as well, Scottish paintings as well, and some sculpture. So it's absolutely worth checking out. Again, it's a free museum. The second most important museum, I would say, in the new town is, or I would say they're tied in first place, actually. I don't recommend one over the other. It just depends on your interest. If you're interested in Scottish history, I would definitely check out the National Portrait Gallery. Even if you don't have time to go through and look at all the paintings, just go check out the building. It is in a glorious orange or red sandstone neo-Gothic building. And when you enter in the entryway, if you look up, there's a frieze that has the paintings of all of the most important people in Scottish history throughout the ages. So it is really beautiful. And again, important Scottish people like James Watt, who revolutionized the steam engine, or Robbie Burns, Scotland's patron poet. Speaking of poetry, another fun way to connect with Edinburgh and with Scottish culture is by considering taking a literary pub tour. You just are taken around by a couple of actors to different pubs, and they do their thing, and it's a lot of fun. Or if that's not your thing, then you might find some local music. You can pick up the gig guide at Tourist Info, or even look it up online, and it will tell you the listings for live music that's happening, different genres all over the city every night, and that works in Glasgow also. Okay, Glasgow is the second city, I suppose, in Scotland. It's the largest city in Scotland. It's where the most people live. It's not the capital, but it's sort of a cultural capital. So a lot of the buildings are this beautiful red sandstone color. You see art on the street, and it's very famous for being the home of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, who is the famous Art Nouveau architect who is from there. So you can visit some of his works like the Willow Tea Rooms. In the Victorian times, Glasgow was the second city of the empire. Many, many, many ships were built in Glasgow, and so you see remnants of its grand industrial age with beautiful buildings like this and beautiful buildings like this. So it's just a joy to walk around. And Rick has some really nice walking tours that you can use in our guidebook to just take yourself through and enjoy it. So it's a lot of fun. They also have a great botanical garden with some gorgeous greenhouses. So on a rainy day, you can creep away in there and get a nice escape. And also in the spring, it's absolutely lovely. The most important museum in Glasgow to visit is the Kelvingrove Art Gallery. It's sort of a Smithsonian, but it's really fun to check out. Again, it's free, so that's fabulous. Another really interesting museum to check out if you are in Glasgow is the Museum of Transport on the Riverside. So really interesting modern architecture from the outside, and it is chock full of antique buses and trolleys and everything like that. So it's a lot of fun. Glasgow makes a good day trip from Edinburgh. If you have 3 or 4 days in Edinburgh, I would definitely consider spending one of them in Glasgow. As I mentioned, it's a great city for culture, has a lot of nightlife, lots of fun restaurants, delicious restaurants, and also lots of music. So I didn't mention this, but Edinburgh is actually a UNESCO World City of Literature. So it has that official status of being recognized for its literary contributions. Glasgow is a UNESCO World City of Music. So across the board, but lots of great live music to be had in the pubs in Glasgow and everything like that.